I'd very much like to thank ODI and CDKN for allowing us to launch this report. It's been quite a few months to achieve this, so please, there are lots of copies, please do take home. And I think I find that the cover, if you look at the cover, I find actually it sort of sums up what integration of climate into the SDGs means. It's a woman and her child stood in front of a solar panel that is pumping fresh drinking water. So it sort of encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about. And the question is, why did these, Christian Aid, Practical Action, Greenpeace, CAFO, WWF Care and Oxfam come together on this specific issue? We all work in advocacy and focused on the UNFCCC on climate change and making sure there's a fair and ambitious outcome in climate change. All these groups work on the Sustainable Development Goals, wanting poverty reduction to be central to these goals and actually to achieve them in that at the 15-year period. And in the middle of that, we had the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, come out with their science, and their science on what's going to happen if we don't stop climate change, what's happening right now because of climate change. And really that brought home the urgency of not just seeing climate change in the UNFCCC box, but very much seeing it as heart and centre of the SDGs. We wanted, in a way, to draw the line under the science. This is what science is saying. You cannot ignore it, and this is what it's saying to you who are focused on poverty reduction and global sustainable development. And really, in this session, between the three of us, I will briefly go through the content of the report just so you have a flavour of it. But really, this paper is then asking the question, why isn't good policy following the good science? We've got the science, where's the policy? And then how can we shift the blockers? We know there are blockers. How can we win them over and actually get them going towards this low carbon resilient future? So as I said, for our report, the IPCC was the starting point. What's the science saying? Both a little bit of the climate science, but more focused on Working Group 2 on impacts and 3 on mitigation. And what are they saying to the Sustainable Development Goals? So we've unpacked for you, really. Please do use the report, look at the facts and figures in there. What's the story the IPCC is telling to the Sustainable Development Goals as they developed? And what should they what lessons should we learn? We then also looked at the Open Working Group's last report and analysed to see how well that is actually dealing with the issues that the IPCC is raising. And on some accounts, yes, they are doing well, but there's an awful lot more could be done to make sure that the SDGs are fully integrating climate change into their outcomes. So we started with the threats and looking at the poverty goal. Obviously, climate change is a direct threat multiplier. I think that's the word IPCC use. All the threats that developing countries are faced are multiplied several times by climate change, and that will increase as climate goes on. And actually, talking to the authors of the IPCC report, and as we developed this report, what really, really struck me in terms of all the poverty goals was that we have to adapt. We have to adapt, we have to build in resilience, we have to have early warning systems for DRR, but we can't do that alone. We have to do that while we aim at a low carbon future. The whole SDG system has to be geared up for delivering the low carbon future, or all that adaptation in many places will be worthless. And I think it will go on more about the limitations of adaptation. Really, we need to be doing both in parallel. Therefore, the Sustainable Development Goals have to be responding both to adaptation and delivering low carbon outcomes. So whether it's agriculture and nutrition, we know that nutrition will go down as agriculture gets more stressed by climate change. Water access is going to be one of the biggest threats and potentially one of the biggest conflict areas over the coming decades. Cities are one of the most threatened. Some of the biggest cities in Asia, particularly, some of the mega cities are threatened by flooding. I mean, they just are. They're also threatened, opposite that, by water stress as glaciers melt. So there's a double threat for cities and infrastructure. And then, as we heard earlier from David Nussbaum, on the ecosystems, fishing ecosystems, forestry, and many, many others, as well as wildlife. But it's not just about the impacts. It's all, as I said, it's also about the mitigation, making sure we are gearing up for a low carbon future. And that means we need a new growth model. I mean, it really means we need a growth model not just aimed at GDP growth, but one that is equitable and one that is focused on delivering low-carbon, sustainable outcomes. They become a trio of objectives, really getting at the heart of the original Rio objectives. We need energy systems to transform. Energy is the quickest way we can go low carbon. It's much, much harder in agriculture and some of the other areas, but energy, we can go renewable, we can go efficient. But we also need to, at the same time, remember we have to deliver energy. There are 1.3 billion people without electricity. There are nearly 3 billion who cook on an open fire using filthy fuels, wood, dung, charcoal. We need to be delivering for them at the same time. We need urban development that is efficient, that is low carbon in its being, so that the materials are low carbon and that they deliver low carbon utility for cities for living. And we need sustainable production and consumption, which is another of the goal areas. We need that at the heart. Actually, the sustainable production and consumption doesn't talk about planetary boundaries. It doesn't really mention climate change. It's little bits here and there. Of course, we need waste reduction. Of course, we need all these indicators, but actually, it needs to go that bit further. And so I think that's my point, I think, that I want to sort of, the other second point. One is mitigation is ultimately super important out of all of this. The other one really is that we don't need a sustainability target here and there, one in agriculture, one in water. We need to make sure that the whole framework adds up to resilient and low carbon, disaster resilient as well, so that actually, if we add up what's happening, our community is going to be safer. Are we heading in a way that's going to put a halt to climate change? So that means we need it integrated, but this is one of the strong arguments for a single standalone goal on climate change, is that check. Is it adding up to below 2 degrees? Is it actually delivering the level? So I think it's keeping it as a headline issue, but it's also making sure that the goals all add up to what we need. And that's one of our strongest recommendations in the report, is that integration plus the headline target, the goal area, is needed. I just wanted to say a couple of things on going back to the politics. One of the big objectives is shifting the politics, and I'm not saying that the politics is easy. The politics is extremely difficult, and there's a lot of resistance, particularly the mitigation, the low carbon goals have been almost made deliberately fuzzy because a number of the countries don't want to sign up to anything too binding on renewables, on efficiency, on changing their energy systems, on moving away from fossil fuels. So I'm not saying the politics is easy. I've been doing, this isn't in the report, but I've been doing a lot of work in South Asia and India, and the example of the difficulty of how you integrate and how you unpack mitigation. And so India is a country which is growing, and the new Modi government is focused on achieving 8% growth. Growth is the ultimate driver of the new government. And you have to commend them. They are developing, for example, the new solar mission. The new solar mission is very ambitious objectives on large-scale solar power as well as smaller-scale dispersed. But it's not solar instead of coal. It's solar alongside coal. In their own strategy, their biggest effort will still double the amount of coal that India is going to consume in the next few decades. So their own objectives for growth are also based on that coal. But these same conventional coal electricity systems are not developing for poverty reduction. They doubled their capacity in electricity, which is largely coal-based, between 2005 and 2013. So in 7 years, they doubled their capacity, but only improved energy access in terms of electricity access by about 13%. It wasn't the staggering. The focus is on delivering to urban and industrial centres, so there's a real difference between the urban access and the rural access. So it's not delivering the energy needs. And even those villages with electricity often only get them electricity maybe 3-4 hours a day. It's a really poor quality electricity service. So really what I think this sort of highlights is that we need a new transformed way of thinking of we need a global and national strategy. So a global framework, that a national delivery and support, the means of implementation would be important to deliver renewable energies that will deliver for poverty reduction where the communities are. And there's a lot of evidence to show that renewable energy using local resources is the most cost-effective way of delivering refrigeration, enterprise development, domestic needs, removing filthy fuels. So looking at how you can really deliver, as well as looking at expanding scaled-up renewables and really looking forward to a new future. We need to start by cutting fossil fuel subsidies. I mean, it's just not, fossil fuel subsidies, both production and consumption subsidies, while protecting poor people to find alternative cooking and other fuels. But it's just, they've been saying it for years and years and years now and just not done anything about it. We need a real discussion on that. And I'd just like, last 30 seconds really to say it's not just a challenge for India. It's a challenge for us here in the UK. The Sustainable Development Goals are universal. They're for all countries to deliver. And I would say we have equal problems. You know, we have on the one hand a discussion not on whether we should have a new airport, but where should we put it? At a time we're saying we're absolutely committed to a global climate deal. Are those two things compatible? We need a much greater coherence between our Foreign Office. Are they working with progressive countries and least developed countries internationally to really make the case for much, much stronger climate action? For DEFRA, for DEC, we're working DEC, making sure our energy systems really are up for it. Can we be talking about investing in infrastructure and fracking, which will last for 20, 30 years, when we need to decarbonise our energy systems now, within the next 15 years? For the Treasury, that's both in terms of investment in the UK, but also climate finance and sustainable funding for the sustainable development, and therefore our role for the Cabinet Office and for real leadership for Cameron. So we're hoping, he's announced David Cameron is going to the Ban Ki-moon Summit. He's got to take a real transformational message. So really, fundamentally, SDGs should be a building block, all the building blocks of achieving a strong UNFCCC. There shouldn't be a tension between them. They should put in place the building blocks for this low carbon future so it's easy to sign up to high ambition in Paris, not so there's a conflict.
Good, Alison, thank you very much indeed.